What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing. The Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series will continue its conversation with you concerning the complete history of boxing. Now, we'll continue with the decade 1915 as we did in our prior video, but I want to take a time out to talk about Sam Langford. I did mention to you at the beginning of the series that I will be individualizing fighters that laid the groundwork for superb contributions to the game of fisticuffs. And Sam Langford is no exception. He's the perfect benchmark, an individual that I can lay this foundation of work with. Because Sam Langford is a product of Jack Johnson. He's a product of Sam McVeigh, a product of Joe Jeanette. He's a product of Jack Blackburn and Dave Holly and Bobby Dobbs and many of them, Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost. So as I speak to you about Sam Langford in detail, I want you to think about the things that Sam Langford might have been going through as I'm speaking to you specifically about his life and his career. Now, Sam Langford was given the name the Boston Tar Baby. I want you to think about that for one moment as I continue discussing the life of Sam Langford. Why he might have been given the name Tar Baby. Because that is very important. It gives you a feel of what it was like for Sam Langford and Jack Johnson and many others as they were viewed as versus how they were treated. His name was Samuel Edgar Langford. He stood 5'7", had a 74-inch reach. Here's the impressive part about Sam Langford's career. At his highest level, he fought from lightweight to heavyweight at his highest level. Very few men in the history of boxing can speak of that. He was born March 4th, 1886 in Weymouth Falls, Nova Scotia in Canada. He died January 12th, 1956 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he had a boxing record of 314 total bouts, 210 wins, 126 knockouts, 43 losses, 53 draws, and 8 no contests. Now, Sam Langford had over 500 fights. A lot of those bouts don't have receipts. But Sam Langford, like many of the early black fighters during his time and before him, fought in knee-deep water with water moccasins. Fought in backwoods, where sometimes only he was the one to represent himself. Sam Langford was in the back of a wagon. With bumpy roads in the backwoods, where he would pass men hanging. On both sides of the ring would be a man on a horse with shotguns, one on each side. Sam Langford obviously didn't know if the man hanging was supposed to win or he was supposed to lose. That's the mindset that a fighter like Sam Langford, Joe Gans, George Dixon would have. His first experience in boxing were on the streets of Boston. He would wind up at the Lennox Athletic Club, where he would become a janitor, stepping into the ring to help spar with a couple of fellas, and it was discovered that he was nice with his hands. He became the Boston featherweight champion at the age of 15 in 1902. In his 20th professional bout, he would face the world lightweight champion, Joe Gans, at the age of 17. Let me tell you another thing that separates Sam Langford from any other fighter, any nationality, any other country. The only fighter to face the first black lightweight champion in boxing history. Joe Gans. The only fighter to face the first black welterweight champion in boxing history. The Barbados Demon Joe Walcott. The only fighter to face the first black middleweight champion in boxing history. Theodore Tiger Flowers. Although Flowers was champion in 1926 when he would take on the Pittsburgh Windmill, Harry Greb in New York's Madison Square Garden, but Sam Langford faced him in 1922. Nevertheless, I should say, he faced the first black middleweight champion in Theodore Tiger Flowers. He was the only fighter, and I'm speaking black or white, to face the first colored light heavyweight champion. Lee Anderson, who was known as the Harlem Bully, and William Ward, better known as Kid Norfolk. He fought them both. The only fighter, black or white, to face the first black heavyweight champion of the world. Jack Johnson. I want you to think about that for one moment. At the age of 17, he faced Joe Gans. That was his first full year as a professional. That was his 20th professional bout. On his 36th professional bout, he would face the first world welterweight champion who was a black fighter. And that was the Barbados Demon Joe Walcott. He was 18 years old at that time. Fought him September 5th, 1904, in Lake Massachusetts Coliseum. And his 267th professional bout at the age of 36, June 5th, 1922, at Ponce de Leon Ballpark in Atlanta, Georgia. He would take on Theodore Tiger Flowers. He would knock him out in 3 rounds. He faced the world colored middleweight champion, the European British Commonwealth champion. Now, the European British Commonwealth champion was Tiger Smith. He faced him April 22nd, 1907 at the National Sporting Club. The colored middleweight champion. He fought young Peter Jackson for the vacant strap. Faced him September 12, 1907 in Los Angeles, California. Now, the European title was vacant as well. When he faced Jack Johnson, April 26, 1906, it was 15 rounds at Lincoln, Chelsea, Massachusetts. I want you to think about what that was like. 2 weeks before he faced Jack Johnson for that monumental opportunity, he was in the ring with Joe Jeanette, the Iron Man of West Hoboken, and he fractured his hand. He would defeat Joe Jeanette in 12 rounds. 2 weeks later, he was in the ring with Jack Johnson, perhaps one of the greatest heavyweight champions in boxing history. Now, Jack Johnson would work with him, give him the business from time to time. Sam Langford was 20 years old. Jack Johnson was 67 pounds heavier than Sam Langford. Langford had fractured his hand. And Jack Johnson knew that Sam Langford was the goods. So he would refuse to give Sam Langford a second opportunity. I want you to think about that for one moment. He would face William Hogue for the British Heavyweight Championship crown. 4-round knockout, May 24th, 1909. He faced Joe Jeanette, September 6, 1910, and won the World Colored Heavyweight Championship bout. 105th bout, the Army Athletic Club in Boston, Massachusetts. He would take on Harry Wills 22 times. He took on Sam McVeigh 15 times. Joe Jeanette 14 times. Battling Jim Johnson 15 times. 113, 2-no decision contest. Sam Langford is my number one greatest fighter in boxing history. Now, my subconscious mind tells me he was the best fighter in the entire game of boxing. And my other mind tells me he was the greatest. Now, is it fair to say you can't call him greatest because he didn't fight the establishment? He wasn't in the ring with Jack Dempsey, who he called out. He wasn't in the ring with Gene Tunney, who he called out. He wasn't in the ring with the twin Sullivan, Mike and Jax, which he called out. He called out Tommy Burns. He called out Jack Root. In fact, with Jack Root, Lou Houseman, who's the Chicago sports writer / promoter, became the manager of Jack Root as he was a middleweight. Moved him up to the light heavyweight division because Sam Langford was on his heels. Jack Root had nowhere else to go because Jim Jeffries was the current champion. He wasn't going to move him up to the heavyweight division, so he created the light heavyweight division. So he couldn't just have him get a belt. He had to have some kind of a tournament of kind. So Jack Root would then take on McCoy, the Kid McCoy, Charles Kid McCoy. And George Gardner would take on Marvin Hart, who, by the way, Sam Langford called out as well. They all refused to fight Sam Langford. And when George Gardner would defeat Marvin Hart and Jack Root would defeat Charles Kid McCoy, those two men would face one another. And George Gardner would come out on top and he would become the first light heavyweight champion. Never gave Sam Langford an opportunity. This is in 1903. Bob Fitzsimmons, who Sam Langford called out, would defeat George Gardner after he was knocked out by the Boilermaker Jim Jeffries, who Sam Langford called out. I want you to understand what I'm trying to explain to you here. Now, Ray Robinson was the greatest pound-for-pound fighter. Ray Robinson fought from the bantamweight, 1938, and he would win the AAU Metropolitan Bantamweight Championship title. That has not been done since a fighter by the name of Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt, who was also known as the Harlem Globetrotter by a small circle of people who knew him. But he was known as the Harlem Thunderbolt. He did that as a middleweight, 1928. But Robinson did it in 38, 10 years later. But he fought from bantamweight and he stopped at middleweight. He couldn't surpass the heat and the weight of Joey Maxim in 1952. Now, clearly, he came back from his tour visiting several countries. He would lose to Randy Turpin, who, by the way, and we'll talk about that in 1951. Randy Turpin was the first. He had a brother named Dick Turpin, who was also the first, and we'll get to that as we move forward. But Robinson couldn't handle anything past middleweight on record. Sam Langford had over 100 fights as heavyweight. And he started as featherweight. So when you talk about greatness, and I mentioned to you the other day in the video about a man coming from one era, going into the next era, and still holding his own. He was 36 years old when he knocked out Theodore Tiger Flowers, who wasn't even in his prime yet, in 1922. Sam Langford began boxing in 1902. And he carried with him a whole string of fighters who were the best in boxing history during his era. He faced them all. The fireman Jim Flynn's of the world. 1911, he knocked out Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who would defeat Bob Fitzsimmons for that title. Sam Langford fought them all. But he was not given an opportunity, as Jack Johnson was not until 1908, as Joe Jeanette was not, as Harry Wills was not, as Sam McVeigh was not, Dave Holly. Bobby Dobbs was the colored lightweight champion, along with Harry Cook. Neither of those men got opportunities. So I just wanted to give Sam Langford his just due. I have him the greatest fighter, subconsciously, and the best fighter in boxing history, no question about it. Have Harry Greb, number 2, Ray Robinson, number 3, Henry Armstrong, number 4. And I'll explain to you why I have every last one of them where I have them. I've done a top 10. So Sam Langford, you heard me mention his name in the years that we spoke about. We're in 1915. I'll be talking about Sam Langford to 1926. And along the way, you'll see the names that he faced. And you'll have a better understanding as to why I have him number 1 of all times. Now, to make my point more clearer to you, you had fighters such as Samuel Bolden. His name was Caddy Johnson, Sam Bolden. He was born in Oswego, New York. This man stood 5'7". And he was a featherweight / lightweight. Sam Langford was 5'7". He went from bantamweight featherweight, I should say, all the way to the heavyweight division. Like I said, he had over 100 heavyweight fights. Majority knockouts. You had Charles Henry Blackburn. Then was Jack Blackburn. He was born May 20th, 1884 in Kentucky. He stood 5'10", weighed 135 to 160 pounds. He was in the ring with Harry Greb, Sam Langford 6 times, Joe Gans, Bobby Dobbs. He fought them all. Where was his title shot? Had a fighter by the name of Ed Bentley. He was the colored middleweight champion. He was known as the Boston Black. He was born April 19th, 1864 in Washington, D.C. He stood 5'9", weighed 154 pounds. He was managed by Tom O'Rourke. I can tell you about all of these fighters. Sam Baker, who was a heavyweight. He was from Oklahoma. He stood 6'4", weighed 220 pounds. He was managed by Tom Cox. He was a very good sparring partner for a lot of the men who became champions. Sam Baker was a tall fighter. You have Bob Armstrong, who was a very good sparring partner for Tom Sharkey, the Sailor Man, Bob Fitzsimmons, Jim Jeffries, Jack Johnson, many of them. He was never given a title shot. He was known as the King of the Battle Royale. He would take on Charlie Strong when the vacant heavyweight championship title, the colored division, was vacant by the Black Prince Peter Jackson. But Sam Baker was another fighter during those days. But our Frank Childs was born July 17th, 1867 in Texas. He was known as this Texan. You know, one thing about Frank Childs, and I'll just say this. He went from middleweight to heavyweight and won both titles in the color division. Weighed 160 to 185 pounds, stood 5'9". And he could bang. He was a craftsman. He could fight. There was a fighter named Esteban Gillard, Kid Charlo. He was born in 1901 in Cuba. He stood 5 foot 8.5 inches. He weighed 146 to 158 pounds. Where was his title shot? Useless cannon. His name was Blackfoot Simmons. They called him Kid Monday. He was born January 15th, 1878 in South Carolina. He stood 6 feet, weighed 170 to 180 pounds. He was self-managed. Where was his title shot? Have you ever heard of Joey Hicks, Allentown Joe Gans, born May 6, 1894 in Virginia? He stood 5 foot 9.5 inches, weighed 155 to 165 pounds. Where was his title shot? You see, this is the problem. Allentown Joe Gans was a dynamic fighter. He would lose his title because of weight problems. Cyril Quinton, Panama Joe Gans, born November 14th, 1898 in British West Indies, stood 5 foot 9.5 inches, weighed 135 to 160 pounds. He was managed by Leo P. Flynn. Where was his title shot? George Godfrey, his name was Old Chocolate. Where was his title shot? He knocked on the door along with Peter Jackson for the title opportunity for John L. Sullivan. He was born March 20th, 1892 in Prince Edward Island. He stood 5 foot 10.5 inches, weighed 175 pounds. He was managed by himself, and he demanded an opportunity to face John L. Sullivan. Where was his title shot? He would take on the Black Prince Peter Jackson, be stopped in 19 rounds. He would lose his title to Peter Jackson. But Old Chocolate, George Godfrey, was a threat, but not given an opportunity that he so rightly deserved. There was another George Godfrey, Phoebe Smith Williams. Now, he was an outstanding fighter. He was born February 27th, 1896 in Mobile, Alabama. He stood 6 foot 3 inches, weighed 220 to 260 pounds. Known as the Leaperville Shadow. He was the fighter, and we'll get to this. When, it's sometimes I get choked up because this is sad. This is ridiculous. Harry Wills, who was known as the Brown Panther, had a written contract agreement with Jack Dempsey in 1924. And we'll talk about this. I'm going to continue to reiterate this. And they go by the Red Lining Act, where after Jack Johnson and Jim Jeffries would fight in 1910, there were riots all over. So they use the excuse that they don't want to fight a black fighter. Because Jack Dempsey, he drew the color line when he won the title. He legitimately drew the color line. But why would he sign a contract, his signature, with Harry Wills in 24 and then renege the contract when that bout took place in 1910, Jeffries and Johnson? So he backed out of it, and then they made the excuse that Tex Rickard would not put up the money for it. Supposed to be in New Jersey. But that ran out when another promoter offered to put up the money and Jack Dempsey refused. So he was suspended out of the state of New York from boxing, and that's why he had to fight in Philadelphia and Chicago when he took on Gene Tunney, 26 and 27. So when Harry Wills was given all these demands to face Louis Angel Firpo and others, he would finally fight Jack Sharkey because Sharkey was in line to face Jack Dempsey before Dempsey faced Sharkey after he lost to Gene Tunney. So Jack Sharkey would defeat Harry Wills via disqualification. And so Harry Wills' colored heavyweight championship title, which had nothing to do with Jack Sharkey, was taken from him. And so the man who fought for that title was George Godfrey, the Leaperville Shadow. He would face Larry Gans out of Canada he would defeat Larry Gans. Larry Gans eventually would become the champion. Then you had other fighters who were heavyweights. Elmer Violent Ray and Turkey Thompson and others. There was a fighter by the name of Obie Walker. Where was his title shot? You had Julius Williams, Jack McVeigh. He stood 5'9". He was born June 8th, 1905 in Athens, Georgia. He would die October 29th, 1975 in New York. He was from Harlem. And he's the fighter that I mentioned to you that Harlem couldn't wait to see. A bout between him and Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt. He's also known as the Harlem Globetrotter by his small circle of people that he knew. He was born October 28th, 1907 in Jamaica, British West Indies. He stood 6 foot, weighed 156 to 176 pounds. He was managed by Dave Brown. He would die in 1933. He got ill. And they put up close to $70,000 to offer Mickey Walker an opportunity. And Mickey Walker turned it down. There were 3 black fighters in the top 10. You had Lynn Johnson, who was from Europe. Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt. And you had another fighter, William Gorilla Jones. Those were the 3. Walker walked from the middleweight to the light heavyweight division and created a tournament. William Gorilla Jones would take on Ozone Piazza. And he would become the second black middleweight champion, but the first one since Theodore Tiger Flowers in 26. When Flowers faced Mickey Walker, they fought in Chicago. Al Capone had his hands all over that fight. Mickey Walker didn't win that fight. Jack Kearns did business with Al Capone. Jack Kearns was the manager of Mickey Walker. So Theodore Tiger Flowers would unfortunately lose his title. When Mickey Walker faced Harry Greb, Harry Greb gave the business to Mickey Walker. When Theodore Tiger fought Harry Greb, fought him 3 times. Harry Greb respected Theodore Tiger Flowers so much that he made sure that he protected him the night of and the following morning to get him on the train safely, because there were death threats after they found out that Theodore Tiger Flowers had won. There were riots. Men were hung. And Harry Greb offered his life and his services to Theodore Tiger Flowers, the man who took the title from him. And both these men would die the exact same way. An eye procedure on the operating table. Harry Greb in Atlantic City. You see, Theodore Tiger Flowers, and we'll talk about him when we get to that point of his career. Georgia Deacon would tell you, please don't use that word in the name of the Lord. Clean fighter. When Battling Siki had defeated George Compartier in 1922, he would go over to have his first title defense. He should have faced Norfolk because that was mandatory. But he fought Mike Mateague. Mike Mateague was Irish. He fought him in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland and didn't come home with the title. All right, we can do this all day. Let me move on to 1915. Shout out to Sam Langford, my greatest fighter of all times. June 29th, 1915, Oxnard Cyclone Sam McVeigh would defeat Boston BoneCrusher Sam Langford 12 rounds at the Athletic Club in Boston, Massachusetts. That was one of 15 bouts that Sam Langford would be in the ring with Sam McVeigh. In fact, that would be the last bout that I talk about. We'll continue this video. In fact, we'll move on And we'll pick it up in another video. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff Series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Look out for the next video on a complete history of boxing right here on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff Series. Be well. Thanks for watching. Peace.